Pacers' first repeat opponent of the season tonight, Washington Wizards in DC on ESPN. What do the Pacers need to do? 3 things to watch for in that game so they can get a victory on national TV. Plus 2 games coming against the Nets. Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets will join us to talk Pacers Nets, as well as Edmond, Sumner, TJ Warren, and we'll talk a lot about rebuilding and how teams can maximize their rebuild and get the most out of it as possible. All on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today diving into 2 opponents coming up for the Pacers, and not just from the perspective of the games, but team building strategy. So we'll talk Pacers Wizards tonight, Pacers national TV on ESPN against the Wizards. What do the Pacers need to do better? What 3 things am I going to be watching for to see if the Pacers can overcome their woes that they had against the Wizards just last week? A repeat opponent so early in the season. Good opportunity for the Pacers to grow. Then Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets will join, and we're going to talk about the Nets. Not only the Nets, who are also 1-4, Edmond, Sumner, and TJ Warren, but the Nets who also went through a big rebuild from era to era, going from the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Deron Williams era to the Karis LeVert, D'Angelo Russell era to where they are now. What do they do well rebuilding? How can the Pacers emulate that? So a lot to get to on today's Locked On Pacers, but we'll start with their game tonight. Again, ESPN, huge deal for the Pacers. Good opportunity for guys like Haliburton and Mathurin to showcase their skills and how much they've been growing to a national audience for guys like Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, potentially on the trade market. Good chance for them to up their rep around the league and amongst fans. It's a big game. It's a really big game, and from the Wizards' perspective, it's the same thing. All the little things matter in these kind of games. Pacers historically have not been great in national TV games. This is their first test of this new era team. It's going to be fascinating to see how well they can play and what they can do, and first impressions matter a lot, which is why, among many reasons, my first thing to watch for in this game, first quarter defense. We did a whole segment on it yesterday. If you want to listen to that, go ahead. Pacers defense has just been miserable in first quarters this season. Worst defensive rating to start games in the NBA, and they gave up 36 in the first quarter to the Wizards on opening night. That has to be better. It'll help them control the game. It'll help them not be forced to recover the entire time. That's something they absolutely have to do better. First impressions matter a ton. The Wizards are going to jump all over them if they cannot defend well to start the game, and they controlled the entire rest of the game against the Wizards. They won from the start of the second quarter to the end of the game. They won the game. That's 36 minutes of Pacers winning basketball. But they lost the game because their first quarter was so poor. They have to get off to a better start. So it's not even necessarily just about that. It's also about the Pacers doing what they say. I'm always an actions over words kind of guy. I can ask all the questions in the world and get all the answers I want. The Pacers have to eventually at some point come out and do the things they're saying, which is come out with more fire, more force, and a better mentality. They have to do that at some point. This Wizards game will be a good opportunity to do that. They can make some schematic changes. They have Turner back. He's got a game under his belt, but they've got to make some mental changes as well and come out trying to win every possession on the defensive end of the floor instead of having another first quarter where they give up 33-plus points. Their best first quarter defensively this year, 33 points allowed. That absolutely has to be better going forward. Number 2 for me in this game, thing I am watching, very key for the Pacers in general this season. Can they get anything going on the wing, right? They have some tinier wings, and Aaron Nesmith and Chris Duarte have had some bursts of solid play. Nesmith's been one of the better defenders for this team, but can they get more consistent production from those guys? They're going to need them to guard Beal. They're going to need them to do well against a bigger Wizards forward room. They're going to have to do well. Depending on what you call Buddy Hield, who mostly plays a guard but has been the 3 in some lineups next to like Andrew Nembhard or even McConnell plus Haliburton at times in their first game. But depending on what you call Buddy Hield, who's been a wing at times but has played pretty atrocious defense this season, Pacers are not getting much from their wings this season, right? Duarte's had some better moments recently, 4 for 9 against Philly, had a really good first half in Chicago, definitely his best half of the season, but then that all fell off. Like, he's had really inconsistent performances all year, and he did very little the first game against the Wizards, right? He only played 16 minutes. He ended up getting a little banged up in that game, but he was also 1 for 3 with 5 points and a -13, right? They need more from him on both ends in this game. And Nesmith, who's been maybe their best perimeter defender this season, I think that's a pretty easy decision to make, and has moved into the starting lineup since they last played. He will be key in this game. He will likely guard Bradley Beal to start the game. He likes guarding the other team's best player, and they start just small enough. The Wizards do that. It's possible to get away with something like that. But he went 1 for 8 on offense last time against the Wizards. He was still a +5. His defense was very valuable, but if he can make some shots, they'll get more from their wings in this game, which is absolutely something they had to do. They need more success from both of those guys. It's really hard to be a two-way wing. It's really hard to be a good defender and a good scorer in the NBA. If all these forwards could do it, it wouldn't be such a valuable skill to have on your roster, but the Pacers need it against a Wizards team that has size at those positions and has Bradley Beal, who you have to contain, right? Not only will it be Beal, but, Avdia, Kuzma, Hachimura, Anthony Gill, right? They've got the size at those positions to do well. It's going to be tricky for those guys to navigate that, but they'll have to do it. It's key for the Pacers. It's part of why they lost to the Wizards in the first place. And the number 3 thing to watch, Benedict Mathurin on national TV for the first time. It's not just that zoomed out. What I'm looking for with him is, can he overcome his recent first half woes, right? What he's had this week, his first road NBA games in pretty tough markets too. Philly's really tough. Chicago's kind of tough. And he's bounced back in every game, which is pretty impressive to me, right? Finished with 19 in Philly, 15 in Chicago. Still finds ways to carve out a successful performance. And again, one of the more impressive things about the way he plays to me, especially as a rookie, is he's very good at throughout the game or at some point, reassessing how he's being covered and changing his approach to be more successful, right? That's something he does very well. And impressively so, right? Not good in the first half in Chicago or Philly, but impressively so, figures it out and gets better as the game goes along and is a valuable force in the second half. But they've had a lot of inconsistent contributors this season. Mather in these last 2 games has been one of them. A better first half would be really big for him, both as a first impression on national television and to kind of get over these road woes. He's always figured it out. He's pretty good at adjusting. And I think another thing in his favor in this case that wasn't the case against Philly or Chicago is they played the Wizards last Wednesday. Go back to the preseason. The Pacers played the Knicks in New York, and then they played the Knicks at home. And Mathurin had his best preseason game by a mile the second time against New York, right? 27 points, people lauding him in the post-game pressers. And he said, he saw something on the film and he changed his approach to attacking the Knicks. And so if he can do something similar where he sees how the Wizards defended him, he sees how they slowed them down, and he adjusts how he will try to score or how he can get open. He played pretty well against the Wizards the first time. If he can do even better or be more effective or more efficient in a way that takes less possessions, that's even better. But, he was, 19 points on opening night on 7 for 15 shooting and 7 boards. He still played very well against the Wizards in that first game. So definitely some growth points for him in general, even though he's played very well. But I think just more consistency for a team that's really been lacking it, right? They've had so many guys who can do good in one half and not the other recently, that Mathurin specifically has been one of their better players this season, especially on offense. Showing his force for all 48 minutes or as much as he can at a young age and learning the league is really important for this Pacers team that hasn't been getting that from a lot of guys. So there's a lot that will go into a game like this. The Wizards are more talented. They showed that on opening night, but a strong start for the Pacers, which would be their first of the season. Their first 6 minutes in Philly were their only really successful first quarter run of the whole season through 5 games. If they get that, if they get better wing play or improved wing play, right? One of Duarte's best defensive games was the win over Detroit, and Nesmith had a solid offensive game. And if they can get solid play from some of their best guys and Mathurin all night, they could win this game. I think they've got a shot. The Wizards aren't that much better than them. But that's a lot of ifs and stuff they haven't been getting in recent games, which is part of why they have been losing. There's still a lot of question marks about the Pacers. It's only been 5 games, but playing on national TV against a quality Wizards team that already beat them this season, those are the things that I will be watching out for as this team tries to adjust and grow into a new era. And seeing how they play against a team they've already played will be very telling and revealing to me, as well as I think themselves, right? Learning what it takes, because the Wizards will also be coming out with adjustments. How do they counter those punches? How do they read the game? All those sorts of things we'll see. The Pacers also play the Nets on Saturday and then again on Monday. And I thought it's a fitting time when they play a team twice in a row to get a picture of that team. So for the next 2 segments, Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets is going to join us, but it's not just about Pacers Nets. you can look up some stuff about the Nets and get a feel for the game. We also talk about, from the local perspective in Brooklyn, how ex-Pacers Edmond Sumner has looked and what's the latest on TJ Warren, how the Nets rebuilt, what they did well and the Pacers can copy. We had a really fun, wide-ranging conversation that I think you all will like, and you should stick around and listen to the entire thing coming right up. Before we talk about that, though, I want to talk to you guys about PrizePicks tonight. You can take Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5, or LeBron to have more than 7.5 rebounds, or KD to have more or less than 6.5 assists. Whatever the lines are on PrizePicks, you can take them tonight. I love that PrizePicks is daily fantasy that is you versus the computer. Instead of all these other people who do different research than you or have more tools that play than you, it's so simple, and it's not you against a person. You've got to try PrizePicks. It's awesome. You pick 2 to 5 players. If they will score more or less than their projections, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people, just you versus their projections. And they've got entries you can do for a ton of sports. NBA, NFL, MLB, college, they've got it all. You can make the entries in a minute or less. It's safe. There's fast withdrawals. It's in over 30 states plus Canada. PrizePicks is a blast. You've got to try it yourself. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com and sign up to play daily fantasy sports. You can get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 if you use the code LOCKEDON. When you sign up, again, you deposit 100, you get 100, you deposit 50, you get 50, you get the idea. But you got to use the code LOCKEDON when you sign up at PrizePicks to do exactly that. Go check them out. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every single day, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. For your second listen, why not listen to the show of the guy who's now here with us, Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets. Locked On Nets, your second listen today and over the weekend, because 2 teams with the same record doing battle on Saturday and Monday, which is why I wanted to get some crossover action, get some Nets perspective. And the Nets had a really unique recent rebuild before the KD Kyrie era, going from the Billy King, Deron Williams, Paul Pierce KG teams into the Karis LeVert, D'Angelo Russell. They started off by drafting Rondae Hollis-Jefferson era. And the Pacers are going through a rebuild. So we're going to talk about rebuilding and the games this weekend. But we'll start with the Nets, because the Pacers play the Nets on Saturday and then Monday on Halloween. I jokingly said it, but what's up with the Nets? They're 1-4, and I think expectations were quite a bit higher for this Brooklyn team.
Just 2 rebuilding franchises, trying to get their feet underneath them, trying to, look at some young talent. This KD kid is going to come along, I think. He's got a good shot to make something of himself in this league. No, listen, man, it's obviously been frustrating. We spent a lot of time, it's 5 games, but start of the season, Doug and I on Locked On Nets spent a lot of time saying, give me 15 to 20 games. Let's see the sample size. Ben Simmons has not looked good offensively, but, game by game, you're seeing these little instances where it looks improved. A theme for the Brooklyn Nets ever since they got Kyrie Irving has been health. Even when they had James Harden, there was times there. Now, Joe Harris coming back from his foot injury hasn't been available for most of these games. Seth Curry not available for most of these games. They took a flyer on TJ Warren. Don't know if he's ever going to play. We've really lowered the bar of expectation on him.
We'll talk about him. We will talk about him.
Sumner has played a bit here for the Brooklyn Nets. He's like a little BB getting shot out of a pellet gun. I mean, the guy plays at 1,000 miles an hour, but there's a lot of things that they're trying to sort out here. And all that being said, 1-4 is a pretty difficult pill to swallow. Although when you look at the teams they've played, they're all playoff teams from last year. They all had top, outside of Toronto, maybe still a really good team, but every other team they played has a top 10 talent on there, and a lot of continuity on those rosters too. So I give some flexibility, but believe me, we're not far out from starting to dissect what exactly needs to get done here to fix this thing.
Yeah, I'm generally a 15 games kind of guy before I make any sweeping takes. Utah's not good. I don't care that Utah's
right.
Utah's not good.
I call BS. I call BS on Utah.
There's one surprise team every year. Maybe Utah is the surprise team, but in general, it takes a lot for me to get over what I thought going into the season. But yeah, the Nets being go ahead.
No, not to gild the lily here, but by the way, if the Brooklyn Nets don't sweep the Pacers in these 2 games, we are going to take a very dramatic turn in terms of how we discuss this. And that's not an insult to the Pacers or anything, but like you said at the top, the Pacers are rebuilding. They are specifically trying to get to the bottom of things. So it'd be really disgusting if you came out even splitting 2 games with a team like that.
I don't think the Pacers have a good chance against the Nets, because the Nets present the problem the Pacers just had for two straight opponents. They played the Sixers on Monday and the Bulls on Wednesday. And the Pacers have some guys who can kind of capably defend and do okay on some of these stars. Not really, but okay. But it's the problem they've had is like when it's James Harden and a second unit against the Pacers second unit, they have nothing for the superstar in that moment. And then when the Bulls can go Levine and or DeRozan or even Vucevic, who killed them, with a bench group, they have been terrible against those lineups. So any sort of staggering the Nets do, I think the Pacers will really struggle with, beyond the fact that, the guys they have defending wings are 6'5", and Kevin Durant's going to laugh when he sees that Aaron Nesmith and Chris Duarte are the guys guarding him. So, there are a lot of reasons I think the Pacers won't beat the Nets, but chief among them is that they can stagger the stars. And, Philly got their first win over the Pacers. The Bulls got over 500 with their win. Like, I think the Nets should win both. But, at the same time, the Nets have been punching bag of jokes in the NBA for the last kind of year for a reason. Like, they do have some questionable things happen to them, so we will have to see.
Yeah, it's been I don't know. It's been a disaster, man. I mean, listen, you cover the,
I'm preaching to the choir.
but again, like, not that the Pacers have been trying to go down this road in perpetuity. They're now starting this rebuild, right? That is now the agenda for this team. And I believe you and I talked about going back maybe the offseason at some point, where the GM came out and said, this is a rebuild. It's going to take time. You need to be patient, which, like, transparency at that level, you usually don't get it, even if it's pretty apparent with the moves that they make. So that that's happening.
Right.
It's not like Sean Marks is coming out and saying, we're going to see what happens here. Like, they've come out, they reset the table out of a weird offseason with a trade request from Kevin Durant and everything else. And they've come back into this saying, the goal and expectation is competing for a championship. They didn't lower the bar after everything that went on. They came right back to the table, doubled down, and said, nope, pushing it all in here again. And you have to do that when you have Kevin Durant, when you have Kyrie Irving, and even whatever version of Ben Simmons this is going to look like. There's no two ways to do that when you have the talent like this on the roster. So, game by game, it's a very razor thin wire that these guys are trying to tightrope across.
It can be tricky. I still believe in the Nets because they have Kevin Durant, and I think he's kind of underrated somehow at this stage of his career. But I'm not going to ask about the stars because I am a Pacers podcaster right now. I have to ask about two ex-Pacers who have migrated over to Brooklyn at the same time. You briefly talked about one a second ago. Edmond Sumner was becoming a fan favorite before that Achilles tear derailed him last August. I mean, he was going to be a rotation piece for Carlisle's team in that first year, and they were trying to win at the start of last season. Kept getting better and better since they drafted him in the second round in 2017. It's just a horrible injury. And so I think a lot of fans were happy he was able to land somewhere, get some guaranteed money, and make a roster. He talked about, I think, describing him very aptly, given his time in Indiana, just runs so fast with and without the ball and is a menace on defense. I don't know if the shots translated. I haven't checked his stats yet, as it looked like it was for a little bit at the end of his Pacers tenure. But how's he looked now that he's on a much better team where his role is kind of a little different than it was for the Pacers?
Yeah, well, it was weird, too, because there was concern there. He had, I think, a little bit of like a hip issue, like a little hip injury or hip, tweak, whatever it was, coming out of the preseason. So it held him off for a minute there at the start of the year. Now they had Harris in and out of the lineup. Seth Curry hasn't made his debut for the season yet. So you go over and look at the games. The season opener, he actually played 19 minutes. Then almost nothing, 3 minutes, 6 minutes. And then this most recent game against Dallas played 15 minutes. Now, the most recent game is where he was an absolute zero from the field, 0 for 4. Got to the line, though, 6 times. So it's interesting. I'm intrigued by him, but I'm intrigued in a way of, is this someone that can figure out the right gear to be in over the course of 15 minutes in a game, right? And I think ultimately his number gets closer to like 7 to 10. I think he has a role here, but when Harris comes back, when Curry comes back, you have the outside shooting. His downhill play, his attacking at the basket is something the Nets lack outside of Kyrie Irving in a lot of regards. So there is a functional aspect to that part of his game too. He plays with like total just reckless abandon, which is really nice to see from a guy who's coming off of a big injury like that. I don't know yet. I think my big curiosity on him is going to be defensively, can you hold up? Because he does look like a feather in the wind out there, right? Like, and we have a lot of these guys. So if he can't carve out a little bit of consistency on the defensive end, I don't know if the offensive game is going to be enough But I will say, if the outside shooting can show up for him, he's only taken 6 so far this year, and he hasn't made any. So that's not great. If he can knock down some of those, then there's like this second unit role, this flex role when you try to separate Ben Simmons from the superstars and still surround him with other scorers. Maybe that's there. So I like it, but I don't know. I think, I'm not putting a lot of expectation on him at this point of the season.
Yeah, I think an off-ball role is a little tougher for him because he had the ball a little more off the near. And the shot was getting better and better, but a lot of adjustments. The defense I'm surprised to hear about because he was a pretty good defender.
And again, it's more like a small sample size, right? So I don't know yet. But
the Pacers played a super aggressive defensive scheme in his better years, and it's not that way in Brooklyn. The other guy I would ask you about, but hasn't played yet, and he hasn't played since the end. We're about 2 calendar years away from seeing the bubble goat back on the floor, TJ Warren. What's the latest on him? Is he going to play for the Nets anytime soon? You might just be guessing because I know very well about this.
And then just to quickly on Sumner, the ball handling, if he can show some of that actually would be a way that he carves out a role for himself because the Nets need secondary ball handlers that really can bring the ball up the court and orchestrate the offense to whatever extent. So that would be a way for Sumner to find a consistent role for himself. TJ Warren, he's getting reevaluated. Key term. He's not returning. He's going to be reevaluated in November. We just talked about this. You got to bring that expectation bar way down if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan, because we've seen this actually when Joe Harris had his ankle injury. They said, we'll reevaluate him. I can't remember what the timeline was exactly. Reevaluate him in December. They reevaluated him. They said, we'll reevaluate him another month. Then he got surgery. Then he came back from the surgery. Then they said, actually, there's some pieces of bone floating around in there. He's going to have another surgery. And the timelines kept getting pushed. I know that all NBA teams can be cagey about injury timelines, etc. The Nets are all time. They're all time. You couldn't get a sense of which way the wind was blowing if you had every bit of weather tech gear in front of you. So he'll get reevaluated in November, but I wouldn't be shocked if you don't see him until December. I wouldn't be shocked if you don't see him until after Christmas. I won't be shocked if you don't see him at all. So any expectation around what he could do for the team, if you think about him being healthy, you got to put that on the back burner. With that being said, I think we have enough to know that he can be a scorer, right? He can come in and take over a game. He can give you 20 plus on a whim. And that's really important for a second unit for the Brooklyn Nets. I just don't know how you put your eggs in that basket.
He would be so good for what the Nets need because he was a good defender with the Pacers in his last season here.
And it was so funny too because we talked about, so we were just starting to talk about how at some point you need to get Ben Simmons to be able to be on the court with other players without Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, because that's how this team starts to get more successful. So you think about flexing a Joe Harris, a Seth Curry into the second unit. We're starting to see some play from Yuta Watanabe, and that's how maybe he has the size, has some perimeter shot. A guy like TJ, in theory, TJ Warren is a guy you go, you're our second unit guy. Like, you are the guy that takes over and scores for us in that second unit with maybe Edmond Sumner helping ball handle and helping facilitate. And then you put Ben Simmons in there with his size, et cetera, and you go from there. So, yeah, it's like in my mind, I can picture how this looks successful. It's just so hard. And every injury that the Nets have suffered over the last few seasons, it's been very rare that the player X comes back and you go, oh, my God, he looks like he did 2 years ago in the bubble. Success.
You talk about cagey with injuries to TJ Warren. The Pacers got almost became a joke at the end of his tenure. Multiple times the message on Warren was with his return timeline was weeks, not months. And then he didn't play the whole season. It's like, I think that was months. I would call that month.
I think that phrase got used too. Yeah, it was like, more like, and they slowly do that. So maybe this is all NBA teams, right? They go from, well, we'll reevaluate in a couple of days. And we say, what days or weeks? And then all of a sudden, in one press conference, they stop saying days and they only say weeks. and then they start saying weeks, maybe months. And they slowly lead you down the path until you're so dejected you stop believing it all.
What you learn is that NBA teams consider 170 days to be a couple days. that is the takeaway.
It's all just a couple of days.
I'm obviously Hey guys, one quick little break from the Nets talk before we talk about rebuilding so I can talk to you about Acre Pro when it comes to land sales. It pays to have experts in your corner, and Acre Pro Midwest Farm Group are your local farmland specialists. With decades of experience in Indiana agriculture, No one knows the market better. Whether you're doing a 1031 exchange, expanding your operation, selling a row crop farm, your local AcrePro agent will walk the land with you and ensure that a deal gets done right. Great service is just the beginning. AcrePro provides unparalleled land data, including soil ratings, elevation, flood zones, and land valuation across parcels, so you get the full picture up front and can be confident in the entire land market. Your agent will cater to each of your individual needs and help you navigate the complexities of buying and selling land, so the process is simple. They've got experts at AcrePro like farmland specialist Kyle Rule, Brady Hammond, Neil Hur, and Kyle Spray. Go check them out at acrepro.com or call 765-587-3185. Talk to your local land expert today. Again, that's 765-587-3185. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every day, free and available wherever you get podcasts. For your second listen, I already gave Adam one plug. So how about the team the Pacers play tonight? The Washington Wizards. Locked On Wizards, Ed Too Flat, killing it, covering that Wizards team that is weird, strange, but kind of having an okay year so far. Let's talk about something other than the two games these two teams played, because a lot of Pacers fans, in fact, some of whom can be up to 30 years old, have never seen the Pacers intentionally go this route. Like, the Pacers...
all the way up to... Sorry, Paul. All the way up to 30 years old.
That's crazy. Like, you could be born in 1990 and have never seen the Pacers intentionally try to not push for the postseason.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of wild, right? Like, a lot of fans don't know what the stakes or know what kind of moves to expect, things like that. And I think everybody gets the reality now. Like you said, the front office has said, this might take a while. And, Rick Carlisle, first thing he says on media day is like, this is a new era of Pacers basketball. Like, yeah, maybe they'll be better faster than people think, but they don't look like they're going to be good this year, right? That's new for this franchise. And it's crazy to say that, like, 30-year-old fans have never experienced this. But all that to say, the Nets, who have a pretty good history, had this kind of era where after they made a very aggressive trade, perhaps the most aggressive trade in NBA history, really had a tough pivot, going from the Deron Williams, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Brook Lopez era to the Brook Lopez and who are these guys era. They had less resources than most teams who enter a rebuild, but they came out of it pretty well, right? 2 straight playoff appearances with the teams of, Jared Allen, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. They get D'Angelo Russell in a good deal. Of course, as the Pacers fans know, Karis LeVert was there. What did the Nets do well, in your eyes, to go from that 21-win team with a bunch of who's that names to a 2-year playoff run before Kyrie and KD changed the calculus? But when they were going through the standard NBA rebuild with limited resources, what did they do well, in your eyes, in that growth path?
Yeah, and they went from Billy King with a little stopgap there with Prokhorov owning the team as well. So there was this weird transformation from GMs and who was going to run things. But you get your way to Sean Marks, and obviously Joe Tsai owns the team now. What they did really successfully, and it's funny too, because with superstars comes weight of expectations. And I think a lot of Nets fans look back at those couple of years through rose-colored lenses of, we never should have traded away these guys. We should have stuck with them. Remember, it was because there was no expectation for them to make the playoffs, and they popped off and they did it. And that's not a bad thing. Like, I think far too many fan bases and teams look at it as, well, if you're not going to be a top 4 seed, why bother? Right? Like, if you're not going to be a contender, why bother?
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, because making the playoffs is fun. Like, making the playoffs is a good thing. And by the way, for organizations, making the playoffs means money. So, like, you can just be a team, but being a team that makes the playoffs consistently is a really good thing. It's how you endear yourself to your fan base. So, that being the case, that's why Nets fans look back at it. What they did so successfully was they looked around the league, and this is scouting, and they identified players that were regarded somewhat as cast-offs, and they went ahead and pulled them in and made reclamation projects out of them. Joe Harris couldn't get into the rotation in Cleveland. He is one of the top 3 three-point shooters in the NBA since coming over to Brooklyn. Spencer Dinwiddie was playing in the G League and then got up to Detroit. Didn't look like anything. Pulled him over and turned him into a guy that was an off the bench, bit of a microwave scorer in the sense of being able to put up volume points. And then D'Angelo Russell, right? They took on, another thing they did really well is they took on, the first step was taking on bloated contracts. They took on Timothy Mozgov from the Lakers, right? And that ended up ending the Brook Lopez era, they did one last little favor by generating his 3-point shot and then send him off to LA and ultimately made his way to Milwaukee. But in one season, they turned Brook Lopez from a non-shooting center, non-shooting big, to a stretch big that could knock down the outside shot with consistency. They elevated his value. They took on terrible contracts, got draft capital thrown in there with it, and they just kept cycling through, taking players that look like cast-offs, elevating them into roles. And honestly, a big proponent of that was what Kenny Atkinson brought to it. He was a head coach that maximized young talent. He's a basketball coach. He understood how to get the most out of them, and young players, inexperienced players, are very coachable in that way. So all of a sudden, you go through this phase, and you mentioned the Karis LeVerts of the world, Jared Allen, right? Like, you go through this group of players, and now you look around the league. Whatever D'Angelo Russell is or is not, he resurrected his career in Brooklyn and is now maybe looking to be traded from the Timberwolves. That's neither here nor there. But Spencer Dinwiddie, he went pit stop in Washington. Now he's out in Dallas. They let Jalen Brunson walk to elevate Spencer Dinwiddie into a larger role. Shot a dagger 3 in Brooklyn last season as a buzzer beater to bury nets in that game. Like, these guys have gone on to have very successful careers. So I think sometimes it's easy to think about draft stock, where you're taken and what your quote pedigree is. If you're in the NBA, you are one of the singular best players at this sport. And sometimes it comes down to fit and functionality. You put a group of players like that together, and then DeMarre Carroll's of the world. There's a lot of guys, fringe players that came through as well. You can win yourself some basketball games. And every one of those guys is maxing out for 82 games because their contracts are on the line, right? Their careers are on the line. And that's how you can turn something around in short order.
So you just unintentionally answered you just unintentionally answered my second question. I'll talk about that in a second, but we'll go through both things you just said. The first one is an opinion of mine that I think the Pacers might end up doing this year is a lot of these teams that go through like one era to the next transitions pretty well. Memphis right now, right? They went from grit and grind. Okay, we have to stink for a little. Now they're great again. They did a ton of salary dumps, a ton along the way to get extra assets. They have talented young pieces. They also drafted really well, but that was a key thing for them. The Nets took on a ton of crappy money. They took on Bojan when the Wizards somehow thought he was crappy money. Like the Andrew Nicholson, Mozgov, there's a bunch more in there, right? The Hawks even, like they took on Solomon Hill. I think they took on Chandler Parsons in there, right? Like these things are really helpful to go from era to era. The Hawks were a 60-win team, and they have to switch. Go ahead. You're laughing.
No. The Nets also, one of the things that they did a lot of just to mess with people was they would put in a lot of qualifying offers on guys and then force other teams to pay big contracts. It only crushed them once, and that was Alan Crabb,
who came back to the Nets.
He came back on the Nets, and it was like, oh. And then the very next season, like he had a decent season for the Nets, and then all of a sudden he ended up back on the Nets, and everyone went, oh no, at almost $20 million a year, this is a real disaster. But you take those swings.
Yeah, so that is what I think. Like, whatever you want to call this year 1, year 2 for the Pacers, since their pivot was basically the trade deadline last year. I think they are still below the salary floor. Like, they're going to do something to take on more salary this year. Salary dumps are good. Like, as painful as they are from a fan perspective, like to get a useless player now, like long term, they are good. They are valuable ways to grow your team and an easy way to get extra assets. You got to use that cap space for something. So that's something that I think a lot of teams that rebuild well do. And I think that the Pacers should try to do. Now, the thing I mentioned earlier, my second question for you was going to be, was there anything unique the Nets did that the Pacers can attempt to copy? And I think what the Nets did uniquely that you just talked about is identifying that bubble fringe talent that, a lot of these teams, a lot of it's through like higher draft picks or internal guys, but being able to scoop up the, I went to IU, so of course I'll include this one, the Yogi Ferrells of the world, the Spencer didn't, he obviously didn't have a big impact on the Nets, but he was an NBA player, right? They found him from an undrafted pool of players. Like that's really important. Like the Pacers have Terry Taylor on their team right now, you could talk about Yogi in a second. Hang on, I have to monologue. They have Terry Taylor right now, who they identified over the rest of the league. They've credited their, analytics department for that, but finding more of those guys is hard, and being able to do that, something the Nets did really well that was unique to their rebuild that the Pacers need to try to emulate. If that takes more money invested in, scouting around the league, if that takes taking some random swings, that they should do it because that's important.
No, yeah, and along with Yogi Ferrell, but also Ed Davis. So I just wanted to mention like these are guys that even overlap into the era with the Kevin Durant's and the Kyrie Irvings of the world. But Ed Davis, like the veterans matter too. Jared Dudley.
Trevor
Remember how
Booker,
he was a real
right?
pain in the butt for all that. He was like, oh my god, Dudley. And by the way, I can't remember who it was because this was a bummer. Gosh, I should be better at this. He got ejected with another player in a critical playoff game, and in the moment, it was like, oh, you take that trade off 8 days a week because it was a starting caliber player. But in that game, Jared Dudley was dominating, like he was having a game for himself. And I was like, this is the only time when you wouldn't want this to be the case. And they ended up losing that game. And it was a bit of a disaster. But that's also like the part of it too. Like there are guys, Trevor Booker was in there as well as like roll through just Quincy Acey, by the way, just for a brief stint. Why not? But like, and it's so funny too, because you think about all these names and you go, and even Ed Davis, it's like he didn't go on to anything great. He had a couple of pit stops and now he's kind of flatlined because he's a rail thin playing at the 5. His value was going to dwindle as it went along. Didn't even make mention of Bruce Brown, which was a big part of the reclamation with Kevin Durant and the Kyrie Irving era as well. But the balance, I think, also comes in on. So you take some younger guys. That's a lot of the names we're mentioning there. But then there's also dudes that are 28 to 30 who have kind of bounced around the league, right? They made maybe a big mistake, you could argue, just from a chemistry standpoint. Uncle Jeff, right? When they had him on the roster, he was the exact 3-and-D guy, a veteran presence, right? So even in the rebuild, before you get to your superstars and attract guys like that, you need to still also bring in veteran talent that has a lot to prove. And they can also teach the young guys. They can help these young guys grow and get better. So like, it's the most cliche thing. Have good chemistry, have rah guys, have the Theo Pinsons of the world on your bench doing the shuffles and getting pumped up. They had the bench mob going for all those years as well. Like all of those little fringe things matter. And it always fell underneath this culture umbrella. It's always what you talk about when you're rebuilding is we want to have a good culture. But it does matter, and you can have success that way. Like if I'm a Pacers fan right now, yeah, this is going to be a really ugly year. But am I going to sit here and tell you that, maybe not next season, but the very following one, that you're going to be in a spot to surprise some people and be winning 40 plus games and be talking about play-in games now, which is a whole new way to get into that playoff conversation? No, it shouldn't be off the table, especially if you do it right and you get yourself into a pretty sweet draft class coming up here that could have a unicorn, as we know.
Yeah, the reason I think talking about the Nets rebuild is just so fascinating for teams in terms of emulation is like they had no resources entering it. No. And they still found a way to do it on a normal, air quote, whatever you want to call normal, rebuild timeline. It did not take them that long to go from one era to success again, despite having like no picks. They had to get them from these salary dumps and in other ways. So that's why I think it's worth studying. And to the veteran point, the Pacers are like, yeah, James Johnson, he come on our team. Yeah, a former Net, right? Like last year, a former Net, actually.
Now him, I might have said, don't go picking that guy up. But no, wow. Joe Johnson was also a great Brooklyn Net in the era of kicking things off in Brooklyn as well. And the one thing I'll ask you just a question, which I'm sure maybe your fan base will say they know the answer to this. The final piece to this was that the Nets moved from New Jersey to Brooklyn. They're celebrating 10 years now being in Brooklyn, and they built themselves up to be attractive enough to bring in a superstar. Are the Indiana Pacers a franchise that can get to that point and do that? Because that's the last piece. If you're not drafting it, that's obviously maybe you get to that point. That's why you want to get low here this season. Because if you don't, it may not be as quote unquote easy as then saying, hey, we've proved we can do it. We have the foundation here. Now we want to add a Kyrie Irving. We want to add a Kevin Durant. And based on the last 4 years, maybe you don't want to do that. But that's kind of the last piece, right? Is being able to get that guy to come here to be the centerpiece for your team. And arguably the Nets were valued by the fact that Kyrie was from New Jersey. So and I know this may sound weird, but you got to look around across the landscape of the NBA, find guys that maybe are from the area and see if there's going to be one of those top 25 kind of players that on the free agent market you can attract to come back home.
Gordon Hayward, Jaden Ivey, the future of Pacers.
But yeah. The future is brighter than you might think, Pacers fans. I'll say that.
Yeah, the star alert thing is harder in this market, of course. Yeah. But the two best players I've ever attracted in the last, I don't know, decade and a half. Malcolm Brogdon, who they got because he was like, oh, this team is good. Victor Oladipo is awesome. Like, I can help them be better. And David West, who, similar thing, was like, oh, wow, this Paul George cat's really good. Like, I can make this team better. And that one obviously turned out fantastic for them. So, like, when you're good or you have that thing built, like, you can get these guys. It does happen. So,
Yep.
Adam, thank you for talking rebuilds with me. I'm going to have to do this with a lot of hosts because there's a lot of learning about rebuilds. So I did it with Jackson Gatlin and Sean Coleman. I miss Sean last year, but I want to get more teams who have done this sort
Talking
of
to the Rockets about rebuilds? What are you doing? Come on, man.
They just started. You're going from era to era right now. I mean, they haven't done a lot of the things that other teams did, but they're doing it.
Anytime I get a chance to take a shot at Jackson, I do. It's very important to me.
Adam's at Locked On Nets. Go check out Locked On Nets, especially because the Pacers played them twice in the next 3 days. So you'll have lots of opportunities. I'm sure on Monday they'll be talking about the Saturday game to the extent that anything important happens in that game. Him and Doug do a great job over there. We'll be back Monday, of course, talking about the Pacers weekend that was. You can follow Adam on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht. Last name spelled Arbrecht. And me on Twitter at TEastNBA. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.